Picture a weapon so crude it looked like something you'd find in a mechanic's toolbox rather than a soldier's hands. A gun so ugly that troops nicknamed it the plumber's nightmare and the cake decorator. A firearm so cheap the military originally intended it to be disposable, literally used until it broke, then thrown away like a spent cartridge. Yet this ungainly hunk of stamped metal would serve American forces from the beaches of Normandy to the deserts of Iraq, spanning 5 decades and 4 major wars. This is the story of the M3 submachine gun, better known as the grease gun, a weapon that cost less than a decent pair of boots, but proved more durable than anyone imagined. In 1942, the United States military faced a problem that seemed simple on paper, but was devastatingly complex in practice. The Thompson submachine gun, that icon of gangster movies and GI heroism, was magnificent and magnificently expensive. At $225 per unit, about $3,000 in today's money, the Thompson represented craftsmanship and quality. Machined parts, fine tolerances, beautiful walnut furniture. It was a gun you could be proud to carry. But pride doesn't win wars when you need hundreds of thousands of weapons and you need them yesterday. The Thompson required skilled machinists, precision equipment, and time. Lots of time. As America mobilized for a global conflict on 2 fronts, military planners realized they needed something radically different. They needed a submachine gun that could be made quickly, cheaply, and in numbers that would make the Thompson's production look quaint. The solution came from the most unlikely of places, a German immigrant named George Hyde working for General Motors' headlight division. Hyde had been born Georg Haider in the German village of Opfingen in 1888, where he'd worked as a machinist and even designed weapons during World War I. He immigrated to America in 1926, anglicised his name, and found work as a machinist and shop foreman at Griffin & Howe, a prestigious gunmaker. By the early 1940s he was working for General Motors' Inland Division, where his talent for firearms design caught the military's attention. When the Army Ordnance Department began searching for a cheap, mass-producible submachine gun, Hyde was the man for the job. To understand why the M3 grease gun came to exist, you have to understand the scale of America's wartime needs. The country was simultaneously fighting in Europe and the Pacific, equipping not just its own forces, but supplying allies through Lend-Lease. Every Thompson submachine gun required extensive machining, carefully cutting steel components to precise tolerances using specialized equipment operated by skilled workers. The problem wasn't just the $200+ price tag. The problem was the bottleneck. Machine tools, those precision devices that shape metal, were desperately needed elsewhere. Tank parts, aircraft components, artillery mechanisms. The military simply couldn't spare the manufacturing capacity for weapons that required such intensive production. American observers had been watching developments in Europe with great interest. The Germans had their MP-38 and MP-40, innovative designs using stamped metal parts. The British had created the Sten gun, which cost less than $10 to produce and could be manufactured in facilities that had never made firearms before. The Sten was crude, ugly, and prone to accidental discharge, but it worked well enough and could be made by the thousands. The Soviets had their PPS H-41, another stamped metal design churned out in automobile factories. These weapons represented a new philosophy. Good enough was better than perfect when perfect took too long and cost too much. The US Army Ordnance Board studied these foreign designs intensively. They measured, tested, disassembled, and analysed. Then they drafted requirements for an American equivalent. It needed to fire the .45 ACP cartridge, the same ammunition used by the Thompson and the military's standard M1911 pistol. This wasn't just about logistics. The .45 ACP was a proven man-stopper, a heavy, slow bullet that delivered massive stopping power at close range. The new weapon needed to be reliable, simple to maintain, and above all manufacturable using resources and techniques that wouldn't compete with higher priorities. George Hyde began working on the problem in 1942, collaborating with Frederick Sampson, chief engineer at General Motors Inland Division, and Colonel René Studler from the Army Ordnance Board. Hyde's initial design, designated the T-15, was already simplified compared to the Thompson, but it still included features like select fire capability, the ability to switch between semi-automatic and full automatic fire. Then, the specifications changed. Eliminating select fire would save manufacturing steps. The weapon would be full automatic only. If you needed semi-automatic fire, you'd learn to tap the trigger. This revised design became the T-20. 5 prototype T-20S were built and sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground in November 1942. What happened next was remarkable. The weapon performed brilliantly in tests. It fired over 5,000 rounds with only 2 failures to feed, and those were attributed to defective magazines rather than the gun itself. Representatives from the Infantry Board, Airborne Command, Armoured Forces Board, and Amphibious Warfare Board all tested it. Their reports were unanimous. Adopt this weapon. In December 1942, barely 2 months after initial testing, the T-20 was officially adopted as the United States submachine gun, caliber 45 M3. The contract went to General Motors Guide Lamp Division in Anderson, Indiana. This was a facility that normally made automobile headlight assemblies, exactly the kind of non-weapons manufacturer the military wanted to tap. Guide Lamp had just finished producing 1 million FP45 Liberator pistols, those crude single-shot weapons designed to be dropped behind enemy lines. They understood stamped metal fabrication, and that's exactly what the M3 required. The gun's construction was revolutionary for American firearms. The receiver, that main body of the weapon, was formed from 2 pieces of stamped sheet metal, welded together. The only machined components were the bolt and barrel. Everything else was stamped, pressed, bent, or welded. The entire weapon contained just 73 parts compared to the Thompson's maze of over 100 precision components. The wire stock folded forward along the side of the gun, reducing its length for storage in cramped spaces. Even this stock had a dual purpose. Its threaded ends could accept a cleaning rod, and it could be used as a wrench to remove the barrel. The gun weighed 8.2 pounds empty, nearly 10 pounds with a loaded 30-round magazine. It measured about 30 inches with the stock extended, 23 inches with it folded. The cyclic rate of fire was deliberately slow, just 450 rounds per minute compared to the Thompson's 600 to 700. This slow rate, combined with the weapon's straight blowback action and the heavy .45A CP bullet, meant the gun barely climbed during sustained fire. It was remarkably controllable, a trait that would prove valuable in combat. The price tag was extraordinary. After negotiations, the M3 cost $18.36 for the gun itself, with an additional $2.58 for the bolt assembly that was subcontracted to Buffalo Arms Company. Total cost $20.94. That's roughly $260 in today's dollars. The Thompson cost more than 10 times as much. This wasn't just savings, it was a revolution. Suddenly the military could afford to equip far more troops with automatic weapons. Production began in May 1943, an astonishingly brief 7 months from initial design to manufacturing. But the ambitious production schedule meant teething problems were inevitable. Early M3s suffered from warped receivers. The heat from welding the 2 stamped halves together would distort the metal. Magazine followers would jam. The cocking handle, that side-mounted mechanism for pulling the bolt back, proved fragile. Drop an M3 the wrong way, or even bump it carelessly, and the cocking handle could shear off, leaving the weapon useless unless you had tools and spare parts. But spare parts were the problem. The M3 had been designed as a minimum cost weapon, intended to be used until it broke, then discarded. The military hadn't planned on manufacturing replacement parts. You'd just get a new gun. This disposable concept looked great on paper, but collapsed on contact with combat reality. Soldiers deep in enemy territory couldn't exactly requisition a replacement when their grease gun broke. Repair depots across Europe found themselves improvising, fabricating parts that had never been intended to exist, modifying damaged weapons to keep them running. The M3's combat debut came on June 6, 1944, D-Day. Paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped into Normandy carrying the new weapon. Their reactions were decidedly mixed. Some appreciated the compact design. Unlike the Thompson, the M3 didn't need to be disassembled before a jump, and its folding stock meant it wouldn't catch on equipment or parachute lines. Others were deeply skeptical. This stamped metal contraption looked cheap because it was cheap. It resembled nothing so much as a mechanic's grease gun, that tool used to pump lubrication into machinery. The nickname stuck immediately. Grease gun. Soldiers who'd carried Thompsons were particularly unimpressed. The Thompson felt substantial, crafted, trustworthy. the M3 felt like it might fall apart in your hands. The slow rate of fire seemed anemic compared to the Thompson's rapid stutter. The lack of a woodstock, of adjustable sights, of that Thompson heft, it all contributed to a sense that this was a second-rate weapon. But combat has a way of changing opinions. The 45 ACP round, that heavy slug, punched through targets with devastating effect. The gun's simplicity meant it kept working in conditions that would jam other weapons. That ejection port cover, a simple pressed metal flap, kept dirt and debris out of the mechanism, a godsend in the dusty bocage of Normandy or the mud of the Ardennes. Soldiers discovered that the slow rate of fire actually helped. You could control your shots, not waste ammunition. The compact size made it perfect for clearing buildings, for tank crews, for anyone fighting in confined spaces. By the war's end in Europe, the M3 and its improved M3A1 variant had largely replaced the Thompson in frontline service. Over 606,000 M3s were produced during World War II, with an additional 15,000 of the improved M3A1 model introduced in December 1944. The M3A1 addressed many early complaints. It eliminated the troublesome cocking handle entirely, replacing it with a finger hole in the bolt. You simply stuck your finger through a recess and pulled the bolt back. The ejection port was enlarged. The magazine catch got a protective guard. The wire stock was redesigned to function as a magazine loading tool and barrel wrench. These changes made the weapon simpler, more reliable, and easier to maintain. When World War II ended, conventional wisdom suggested the M3 would fade into history. New weapon systems were being developed. The M1 carbine had proven popular. Surely this crude wartime expedient would be relegated to storage depots and eventually scrapped. Conventional wisdom was spectacularly wrong. The Korean War erupted in June 1950, and suddenly American forces needed submachine guns again. Not only did the M3 return to service, it became the dominant American submachine gun of the conflict, used in far greater numbers than the Thompson. There was a practical reason beyond availability. The communists were using Thompson submachine guns, weapons the United States had donated to China during World War II. To avoid confusion in the chaos of combat, American and South Korean forces standardized on the M3. The Ithaca Gun Company received contracts to produce an additional 33,000 M3A1s specifically for Korea, along with thousands of replacement parts for weapons that had been in storage since 1945. In Korea, the grease gun found its niche. Tank crews loved it, compact enough to store in a cramped turret, powerful enough to defend against infantry assaults. The harsh winter conditions that plagued other weapons seemed to bother the M3 less. Its simplicity meant fewer things could freeze or malfunction. When things did break, the straightforward design meant even inexperienced soldiers could perform basic repairs. But Korea wasn't the end. Vietnam saw the M3 continue its improbable service life. Helicopter pilots carried them. The compact design fit in cramped cockpits better than an M16 rifle, and the .45 ACP offered more punch than a pistol. Special Operations Forces, particularly Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces, used suppressed versions. These weren't new weapons. They were modified M3s from World War II, fitted with sound suppressors designed by Bell Laboratories. The subsonic .45 ACP round was naturally quiet, and with a suppressor attached, the M3 became impressively stealthy. Recon teams from the highly classified Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observation Group used these weapons while prowling through Laos and Cambodia, where silence could mean survival. The weapon's versatility was remarkable. The Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, had ordered approximately 1,000 M3s with integral sound suppressors during World War II. These weapons saw action with resistance fighters in occupied Europe. Some M3s were even manufactured in 9mm parabellum caliber, allowing operatives to use captured German ammunition. Conversion kits let standard .45A CPM3s accept 9mm barrels and British Sten magazines, though these kits saw limited production. Through the 1970s and 1980s, as the United States military transitioned to the M16 rifle, and later the M4 carbine, the M3A1 quietly persisted. It remained standard equipment for armoured vehicle crews, particularly those operating the M60 main battle tank. The logic was simple. Tank crews needed a personal defence weapon for situations where operating the tank's main armament wasn't practical. The M3A1 fit perfectly and racks designed for it, was powerful enough to be effective, and most importantly, didn't require training on a new weapon system. Why fix what wasn't broken? In August 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United States military that deployed to Saudi Arabia for Operation Desert Storm included units still equipped with M301 submachine guns. Nearly 50 years after the weapon's introduction, soldiers carrying grease guns went to war one final time. M60 tank crews, M88 recovery vehicle crews, and various support personnel carried weapons that could have been issued to their grandfathers. The 1991 Gulf War marked the grease gun's swan song. After the conflict, the military finally began systematic replacement of the aging submachine guns. The M4 carbine, a shortened version of the M16 rifle, became the standard personal defense weapon across armored and support units. The M3A1s were turned in, most eventually destroyed or relegated to museums. Some National Guard units kept theirs slightly longer. The M60 tank continued serving with some Guard units until 1997, and their crews kept the M3A1s until the tanks were finally retired. The remarkable aspect wasn't just the longevity, it was that the weapon remained relevant. Modern firearms didn't make the M3 obsolete because its job didn't change. Tank crews in 1991 faced the same basic requirement as tank crews in 1944. They needed a compact, reliable weapon for close-range defense. The M301 still delivered that capability. Its 45 ACP round still hit hard. Its simple mechanism still functioned reliably. Its compact size still fit in vehicle racks. The fact that more sophisticated weapons existed didn't change these fundamental truths. The M3's success came from understanding what submachine guns actually did in combat. These weren't precision weapons for marksmanship. They were bullet hoses for close-quarters fighting, for clearing rooms, for defending positions. Within 100 yards, the M3 was devastating. Beyond that range, soldiers had rifles. The crude sights didn't matter because you weren't aiming carefully. You were pointing and firing. The lack of adjustability didn't matter because the weapon had one job and did it well. The stamped metal construction that made the gun look cheap was actually a feature. It couldn't rust as easily as machined steel because the stamping process compressed the metal's grain structure. The loose tolerances meant dirt didn't jam the mechanism as readily. Parts could be slightly out of spec, and the gun still functioned. This wasn't precision craftsmanship, it was robust engineering. The 45 ACP cartridge proved ideal. Unlike smaller, faster rounds that could ricochet or overpenetrate, the heavy point .45 slug dumped its energy into the target. At submachine gun ranges, it was absolutely lethal. The slow, cyclic rate meant controlled fire. You could squeeze off short bursts without emptying the magazine in seconds. Ammunition consumption mattered when resupply was uncertain, and despite its disposable origins, the M3 proved remarkably durable. Weapons made in 1943 were still functioning in 1991. With minimal maintenance, just basic cleaning and occasional spring replacement, the guns kept working. The simplicity that critics mocked became the weapon's greatest strength. There were fewer things to break, and what could break was easy to fix. Total production of M3 and M3A1 submachine guns exceeded 650,000 units. While this number pales beside the Thompson's production, or the millions of M16 rifles manufactured, it represents one of the most cost-effective weapon programs in American military history. Those 650,000 guns cost about $13.6 million to produce, roughly $200 million in today's dollars. The equivalent number of Thompson submachine guns would have cost over $146 million in the 1940s dollars, more than $2 billion today. The M3's influence extended beyond American service. The weapon was provided to numerous allies during and after World War II. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Greece, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, and dozens of other nations received M3s through military aid programs. Some countries copied the design. China produced the Type 36 and Type 37, direct clones of the M3A1. Argentina manufactured the PAM-1 and PAM-2, slightly scaled down versions in 9mm. These weapons served into the 1980s and beyond. The M3 also became a cultural icon. Movies and television embraced the weapon's distinctive appearance. The Dirty Dozen, that 1967 classic, featured Lee Marvin's character using a grease gun. War films throughout the 1950s, 60s and 70s prominently displayed M3s, cementing the weapon's image in popular consciousness. The gun became shorthand for World War II American soldiers, even though the Thompson actually saw far more widespread use during the conflict. Military historians recognize the M3 as a watershed moment in American firearms design. Before the grease gun, US military weapons emphasized craftsmanship and durability through quality materials and precision manufacturing. The M3 proved that stamped metal construction, minimal machining, and utilitarian design could produce effective weapons. This philosophy influenced subsequent designs: the M60 machine gun, various grenade launchers, eventually even elements of the M16 rifle system. The idea that weapons could be simple, cheap, and effective became acceptable. For collectors today, transferable M3 and M3A1 submachine guns command prices between $27,000 and $40,000, a dramatic appreciation from that original $20 price tag. These values reflect both scarcity — relatively few transferable examples exist under US firearms law — and historical significance. The weapons that were once considered disposable are now treasured pieces of military history. If you'd told military planners in 1943 that the M3 grease gun would still be in American service at the dawn of the 21st century, they would have laughed at you. The weapon was designed as a temporary expedient, a wartime compromise that would be replaced as soon as better options became available. Instead, it outlasted the Thompson it replaced. It served longer than the M1 Garand rifle. It remained in inventory after the M14 and M16 had come and gone from frontline service. Even some units using M4 carbines as their primary weapons still had M3A1S in their arms rooms. The secret wasn't revolutionary technology or superior performance. The M3 survived because it was good enough. In military procurement, good enough is often a higher standard than excellent, because good enough can be produced in the quantities needed, at the price the budget allows, by the manufacturing base available. The M3 checked all those boxes from day one and never stopped checking them. Looking back across those 50 years of service, from Normandy to Kuwait, from the Pacific Islands to the Korean Peninsula, from Vietnamese jungles to Saudi deserts, the grease gun stands as testament to a particular kind of genius. Not the genius of invention or innovation, but the genius of understanding exactly what's needed and delivering it without compromise or pretension. George Hyde and his collaborators at General Motors created a weapon that did its job, cost almost nothing, required minimal training, and refused to quit. The soldiers who carried the M3 never loved it the way they loved the Thompson. They didn't treasure it as they might an M1 Garand or maintain emotional attachments to it, but they respected it. They trusted it. When the chips were down and combat got close and personal, the ugly little stamped metal gun worked. And in the end, working was what mattered. The M3 grease gun, an $18 submachine gun that lasted 50 years, not because it was beautiful, not because it was beloved, but because it was exactly what it needed to be. Nothing more, nothing less, and sometimes that's precisely enough. If you enjoyed diving into this forgotten piece of military history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We cover the stories behind the weapons, the technology, and the people that shaped modern conflict. There's always more history to uncover, and you won't want to miss what we explore next. Until then, stay curious.